Let me introduce him a bit. He's Executive Director, Foundation for Revitalization of Local Health Traditions, popularly known as FRLHT Bangalore. He has received many awards. In 2003, he received Columbia University's Centers for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, its first international award to Darshan, Shankar and FRLHT in recognition of its outstanding contribution in revitalizing traditional medical systems. In 2002, he also received on behalf of FRLHT the Equator Initiative Prize by United Nations. He was awarded Norman Borlaug Award for his contribution to promoting conservation of wild populations of medicinal plants. He holds many honorary positions. Currently, he is advisor, ISM&H, Planning Commission, Government of India. He is convener to Working Group on Traditional Health Sciences of the National Knowledge Commission, Government of India. Member, Executive Board of Global Initiative for Traditional Systems, Oxford, UK. The list is really long. I have a full page of what these people are doing, and I'm really proud that all of them have spared time for us today. With over 25 years of experience at the field level, Darshanji has developed a clear understanding and insight regarding what should be done to strengthen and contemporize Ayurveda, and at the same time to protect common man's interest. I request Dr. Darshanji to come here on the stage to speak to us.
A very good afternoon to all of you. My respects to Professor Bodekar and to colleagues on the dais. So I'm going to share a few thoughts on traditional medicine, innovation and intellectual property rights. Today, intellectual property rights have undoubtedly become an important commercial instrument in global trade, because intellectual property rights confer exclusive manufacturing and marketing rights to the holder of the intellectual property. It has therefore become imperative for national governments, certainly for India, to evolve intellectual property right policies for its knowledge products. In the field, however, of intellectual property rights and traditional knowledge, my understanding is that in this country, we haven't really done enough for the development of traditional knowledge innovation. We have spent a lot of emotion in recent years in crying wolf in the context of petty thefts that have been committed from time to time on traditional knowledge products. But we don't seem to be sufficiently concerned about the utter neglect of traditional knowledge systems themselves and the drying up of the creativity that has inspired in the past the making of an ocean of knowledge that is contained in our traditional knowledge systems. Traditional knowledge is undoubtedly a potentially rich area for the development of intellectual property rights. However, worthy intellectual property rights can only emerge when the latent genius of the traditional knowledge systems and the scientists who are the carriers of these systems is nurtured in an environment in which they can do world-class work. In the last decade, in India, as also is probably the case in several other developing countries, we have been engaged in activities marginal to the development of intellectual property in the traditional knowledge systems. We have, for instance, been fighting battles with persons who have committed petty thefts of traditional knowledge and made false intellectual property right claims based on the stolen traditional knowledge. We have been digitizing centuries of traditional knowledge that we have created in a form in which we can establish its prior art and thus prevent false patents from being filed. We've been working on what we call under the Convention on Biodiversity that Professor Bodekar mentioned. We've been working on access and benefit sharing, ABS as it's called, models on access and benefit sharing models that give holders of previously developed traditional knowledge a fair deal when somebody wants to utilize that knowledge. But there's hardly been any fresh investments to establish new intellectual property rights based on recent innovation. There are subcritical investments in supporting traditional knowledge institutions, both at the grassroots level, where also a great deal of traditional knowledge has been generated in the past, as well as in mainstream institutions. All our scientific funding, the science and technology funding, which is public investment in science and technology and innovation, we invest a negligible proportion of the science and technology funding in India towards traditional knowledge innovation. Even in the health sector, the traditional knowledge segment in the health sector receives something of the order of 3% of the national health budget. Now, with this kind of subcritical support, it seems to me strange that on one hand we talk about protection of intellectual property rights, but we do not invest sufficiently in the growth of traditional knowledge itself. There are two kinds of efforts that have been going on in the area of creating intellectual property related to the traditional health sciences. In recent years, there has been limited investments been put into what one might call transdisciplinary research. That is research which seeks to build a bridge between traditional knowledge and modern science. This is one kind of area in which there have been in recent years some amount of limited, I would still say subcritical investments. There's another area in which intellectual property can be created, and that is not in the transdisciplinary area, but in the parental area, in the basic discipline of traditional knowledge itself. It's important to realize that the ocean of knowledge that has been created over the centuries from traditional knowledge systems was not created with the aid of any of the modern sciences, be it physics or chemistry or biology. So how did this huge ocean of knowledge that we have today in our possession that is represented in the form of our understanding about the biological properties of thousands of species of plants, that is represented in the form of our books on materia medica, where we have perhaps over 40,000 herbal formulations that are documented in traditional medical texts. The ocean of traditional knowledge includes sophisticated knowledge of diagnostics, very sophisticated therapeutic procedures, and so on and so forth. All this traditional knowledge was generated based on the epistemology of traditional knowledge systems themselves. And so therefore there are these two areas in which intellectual property can be created out of traditional knowledge. The more fashionable area, perhaps an area which is very important for the purpose of communicating with the world, is the transdisciplinary area. I believe it is important to support institutions to do serious work in the transdisciplinary area, linking traditional knowledge and modern science. But surely this cannot be the sole agenda for a knowledge-rich country like India, for a heritage of the kind that we have. We must also invest in creating intellectual property based on the theoretical foundations of the traditional health sciences of India. Both these kinds of efforts need to be substantially supported. And so my plea before this audience is that while we are concerned about traditional knowledge, innovation, and intellectual property rights, let us not confine our efforts, as they are at the moment, merely to looking at access and benefit sharing on the basis of previously discovered knowledge. Let's not spend the entire nation's efforts in digitizing centuries of traditional knowledge. It's important, of course, to digitize this, but let's not only spend our time digitizing this so as to prevent people from falsely claiming intellectual property over knowledge that has originated in this land. Let us also invest substantially into creating fresh and new intellectual property based both on transdisciplinary research as well as based on research into the theoretical foundations of the indigenous health sciences. I therefore believe that the most important agenda before this country, if we are to further traditional knowledge innovation and IPR, is not merely to cry wolf for the petty thefts that are going on. Let the policemen, so to say, in the area of intellectual property look after those petty thefts, but let scientists and traditional knowledge creators not spend their time in this wolf calling game. Let the nation invest money into building world-class institutions for traditional knowledge research, for traditional knowledge education, both in the area of transdisciplinary research as well as in the area of fundamental and foundational work for the development of traditional knowledge. That is how we will recreate an emerging era of traditional knowledge innovation and new intellectual property rights. Thank you very much.